Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wisdom Factory, coming to you from Umbria in Italy. And we have a special show tonight with a couple very, what should I call them? Distinguished, I would say, guest co-authors of a book that will tell, what should you say? It's going to revolutionize politics, and it's legal.
You are Mark Davenport, no?
And
I'm Heidi Hörnlein, and we are from the wisdomfactory.net, where we do regular live broadcasts from now on every 2 weeks, where we do, for instance, this series is Conversations That Matter. And what we have today in the program is the SIMPOL, not the simple, but maybe even simple, but SIMPOL solution. How to solve the biggest problems of the world. Here, maybe I show you to the here. This is John Bunzl, the author, and I would say originator of this idea. And now we go over to Nick Duffell, who is the co-author of this
He
book.
doesn't have a book to hold.
No, he doesn't, but we will show it again later. Okay. Do you want to say something? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Great. That's the second one. Maybe afterwards you tell us the difference, John.
That's the same one.
It's the same one.
It's the same one with, okay.
American edition.
The American.
The US edition has a different cover.
Oh.
Hey, don't put it down, John. The US edition is being distributed by Penguin Random House. That's nice.
That's a big company. Yeah.
I didn't put it down.
You know what? We could ask our guests to introduce themselves instead of us. By the way, on the wisdomfactor.net/the-simple-solution, there are all the long bios and everything, and the books you can find there, and the links to the books. So we allow them to say what is important about them, don't we?
I have no voice anyway.
Oh, okay, good. So who wants to start, John?
John.
Yes, well, hello, everybody, and it's great to be on the Wisdom Factory, and thank you very much, Heidi and Mark, for inviting us. My name's John Bunzl. I'm basically a businessman. I'm a director of what mainly handles textiles trading in the UK, a small to medium-sized company. Back in 1998, I had an idea for how we might transform politics to solve global problems. And from there on, I wrote a book, then I started the campaign, and it's been developing ever since. So that's me.
Okay, Nick, I muted you because you went a little bit upside down, and there was some noise. You must unmute yourself, going on top and unmute yourself. We don't hear you yet. We don't hear you yet.
Do you hear us, Nick?
Do you hear us? You have to unmute yourself. On top of the yeah, okay. Okay.
Hey!
Tell us everything again.
I'm sorry for the confusion. I just to let everybody know, I'm sitting on the steps of a mairie in a tiny little commune, really out in the sticks, nowhere, because I can't get internet in my place anymore because of the cloudy weather, which we've had for a month, and is destined to have a month longer. So just then, the secretary of the mairie wanted to get in, and I was sitting in the doorway because in the kitchen where she said I should go, I can't get the internet really, so I'm here. So, you know, that's everything I need to say, really, isn't it, at this point?
Live broadcast. It's interesting.
Yeah. And would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. You see, really, my day job is a trained psychotherapist after 30 years of clinical practice, which I don't do anymore. I see a few couples and supervise these. And that allows me to pursue what my real interest, which is to apply psychological processes to the kind of processes which haven't yet had psychological thought on them, which is in particular and crucially politics and economics. So I got to get my hands dirty in politics. And I now call myself a psychohistorian because the last book I wrote, called Wounded Leaders, has a very big impact into the village political scene because it traces the whole path to power that's based on childhood abandonment there. So it's quite a prescient thing. So I am really interested in saying, how can we use psychological knowledge, which is really powerful, really takes us to the heart of things, behind motivation, all such stuff, into how things work, to actually sort out what's going in politics. And then I came across, again, for the second time, this guy, John Bunzl. Firstly, my wife introduced me to his work about 10 years ago. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. As you do, that's interesting. And then we got into it again some years later, and I thought, look, this is really quite smart because actually everybody's bloody clawless, we're toothless. We all see the world going to shit in a handcart and we can't do anything. And John was saying very clearly, well, this is the major reason why it is, and this is one way I've come up with, very simple, using existing structures, you can get back in the driving seat. So I got very interested, and I met with John, and I invited John to a symposium where he spoke about the effect of workplace practices on men, and we got to know each other. And after Wounded Leaders, he saw a good line or two. So he said, come on, write the thing, and that's when they're onwards.
Okay, we didn't hear the last one, but hopefully the others did hear the end of your last sentence.
Yeah, well, then we started to write the book, and then in a way it's another story, because then I began to go on, because John was a guy who already had quite a few psychological and even metaphysical thoughts about the process of politics and how things might evolve and could be evolving, which are very interesting and was right straight down the line and the sort of stuff I'm thinking. So we got on really well, and his idea is just brilliant, I think now, finally, after I had many struggles, because I wasn't convinced in the beginning. I thought, I'm an old lefty. I thought, what about the have-nots? What about the have-nots? Where is it there? And then in the end, I'll say more later why I think it's so brilliant, but it is, and it's terribly simple, and hopefully we can get people interested, and because it's going to work.
Yeah. I got to know John about, I think, 6 or 7 years ago in a German integral conference, and I was immediately taken by this idea.
You got it immediately. Some people do. Some people get it immediately.
Yeah. That doesn't mean that I adopted it, because I'm not. It's about voting, no? Regain the power of your vote. Yeah. And I'm not living in Germany where I can vote, and here I can't vote. So it didn't work for me personally, but I really very pleased that we can do something to bring your idea out. And at that point, I would like you to explain a little bit what that is, the SIMPOL solution.
Yeah, just before we do, Heidi, just actually on the point that you were making and Nick was making, one of the reasons we wrote the book together was because I realized after many years' experience that there were a few people who got the idea straight away, no problem, and many people who just couldn't get it. It didn't. I used to think, well, maybe it's my problem. Maybe I'm not explaining it correctly, or maybe there's something wrong with the language or something. And then when I finally picked up Ken Wilber's books, I realized that it was a question of consciousness and the fact that most people today are operating at a modern or postmodern level, whereas people who were operating at an integral level seem to understand the idea straight away. So I realized that it's not just a question of the logic or even brilliance or whatever of the idea itself. It's how do we actually help people to make that shift in their way of thinking from nation-centric, which is what both modern and postmodern levels are really nation-centric in their civic political outlook, to a integral world-centric level, which is where something like SIMPOL becomes second nature. So that was really why I felt, well, I need a psychologist to come in on this, to sort of really help me, help explain the idea, to take people from where they're at to where they can hopefully gain a more expansive, higher level view.
That makes complete sense, and I'm glad that you found the right person to work with.
Well, actually, I mean, you're not 100% wrong there, because the things that I had been specializing in is how does dissociation and denial work when it operates on a cultural level, when leaders are dissociating, and I'd made a special study of that, and one of the things that struck me first of all about John is he said, very, very simple. We've got a problem with competition. It's gone over its limits. It has a constructive side, but it's now become destructive. And together we call it destructive global competition as a kind of term now. And John was saying all the time, you look at what's going on, people bring in these solutions, or they ask for something, or they try for something, and actually they can never carry it out because they're all in denial that there's so much competitiveness going on between nations, and it's been normalized and it's been denied. Within that competitive kind of paradigm, there are lots of things called externalities, which in psychotherapy language are just objects of dissociation that you've put somewhere down the hall in the psyche and they don't bother you anymore. But in this case, it happens to be things like our resources and our environment and things like that. And so coming from that, I understood how dissociation could really affect the political perspective. And then the other thing that was interesting is how having a very strong identity inhibits creativity in the political realm. And I'm afraid the worst candidates in that are what John calls the social justice movement and the kind of global justice movement. So we worked a lot on the identity problems going on there because they're very basic and they're very crippling in terms of mental curiosity. And by curiosity, I mean the ability and the interest to see the things that you don't already know, which are like over the street from where you're standing.
Yeah, I mean, the basic problem in the world that I see is that if you take, and this is what the simultaneous policy or SIMPOL is based on, is if you take almost any global issue like climate change, like wealth inequality, like corporate inadequate taxation of corporations, tax havens, any of these issues, there is actually just one single barrier that is preventing nations or preventing anyone from solving them. And that is that any nation that moves first to, for example, reduce its emissions by a significant degree, the only way it can do that is by increasing taxes and regulations on its corporations. But any nation that does that in advance of other nations is going to suffer a competitive disadvantage. And that will just force businesses are going to say, well, look, if you tax me more, that's going to make me uncompetitive. I'll just move my operations somewhere else. And so the jobs would leave, the investment would leave. So we're in a prisoner's dilemma, effectively, where no nation can really move first. Now, it's important, though, to point out, I'm not saying that nations can't do anything, but if you take climate change, for example, they can perhaps reduce their emissions by maybe 10 or 15 or even 20% unilaterally without significantly harming their economy or their competitiveness. But if we all know we need an 80% reduction in carbon emissions. Now that you will never ever get unless you get all or sufficient nations to do that simultaneously. And because, you know, which sounds fantastic and sounds crazy, and I know some of your listeners are probably already thinking, well, this guy should be taken to the mental hospital. But if you think about it, you know, in a globalized world, we have to have global solutions. And if all or sufficient nations can be brought to act simultaneously to implement these measures, no nation would lose out. No nation's economy would suffer a competitive disadvantage. So that's the basic idea behind it. But from that, just coming back to what Nick was saying about identity and the global justice movement, is that I think the global justice movement, just like society as a whole, is coming from a nation-centric worldview. And that means that they still believe in the power of national governments, their national government. And so if you're a global justice activist and you want your government to reduce emissions by a significant degree, you believe that you have to vote in the right party, and you have to lobby and petition and protest enough on the assumption that if we just do enough of that, the government will act. But what SIMPOL is saying is, sorry guys, it's not that the government doesn't want to act, it's that it cannot act unless all sufficient governments act together. So that's moving from a sort of nation-centric civic perspective to a world-centric civic perspective. So that's the background to it.
So it's so simple. Why hasn't it happened? Yeah.
Well, that was just the problem analysis, Mark.
Yeah.
The solution is simultaneous. There are really three aspects to SIMPOL. One is simultaneous implementation by all sufficient nations of global problem-solving policies. Now, I'm not talking about all global problems being solved on one day. That would be crazy. We're looking at probably a series of simultaneous policies. So in year one, then another one in year two, another one in year 4 or 5 or so, you know, so a series of simultaneous policies. The second aspect is a multi-issue policy agenda. If you look at the way the world is trying to solve global problems today, such as climate change, it is trying to deal with just one single issue at a time, carbon emissions. But the problem is, whenever you take one single issue, you will always have some nations that will win on that issue, but others that lose. So, for example, the USA, being one of the highest emitters of carbon, would have the biggest cuts to make, it would have the highest costs, and therefore there is no immediate incentive for the US to cooperate, which is partially explains why Trump has pulled the US out. Mm-hmm. Now, what SIMPOL says is we need a multi-issue agenda, policy agenda. So one simultaneous policy package could, for example, be a climate agreement combined with a currency transactions tax, for example. So if you had a global tax on every foreign exchange transaction around the world, where you raise maybe 0.0001%, that would raise billions and billions of dollars. And those billions could then be used to pay off the big losers on the climate part of the agreement. And in that way, so for example, the US could be fully compensated for the cuts it's making. The Middle Eastern nations, oil-producing nations, could be compensated for keeping their oil in the ground. You know, so the basic idea is that if you combine a revenue-raising, a global revenue-raising policy with a climate agreement, you then have the opportunity of making immediate action in every nation's interests. And this is really what SIMPOL is about, is how do we make cooperation in every nation's self-interest? Okay. And the third aspect is the voting aspect. Now, what we're inviting citizens to do is to just simply sign on to the SIMPOL campaign, and that means that that we, on their behalf, send a little email to their member of parliament or in the run-up to an election to the candidates standing in their parliamentary area, telling the politicians that our supporters will be giving strong voting preference to any politician within reason that signs on to SIMPOL, to the probable exclusion of those who don't. Okay, now in that way, we are turbocharging the competition between the different competing candidates at an election. And at the same time, however, for a politician, there is no risk in signing up because he doesn't have to implement the simultaneous policy, because it only gets implemented if and when sufficient nations are on board. So for politicians, it's a win-win to sign up. But if they don't sign up and one of their competitors signed up, they could lose my vote and the increasing number of votes of SIMPOL supporters. And with many elections being won and lost on quite fine margins now, it doesn't take many people saying, well, I'm going to vote for any party or politician within reason that signs up to this, and they will all have to sign up. And in many, as I'll explain later, in some parliamentary constituencies, that's exactly what's happened. We've had all the competing candidates have all signed up. So whoever won the seat, SIMPOL gained another member of parliament regardless. So this is also another way of doing politics. I mean, in a way you could say it's a bit like having two votes rolled into one. By signing on to SIMPOL, you get a global vote, and using that vote, we drive the politicians to sign up to implementing SIMPOL. So that's your global vote. And then on election day, you get your national vote, just like everybody else. So it's 2 for 1. Or you could say that the SIMPOL vote transcends and includes your national vote. It's another way of looking at it if you want to talk integral language. Okay. Mark, you've got a question.
Well, yeah, this gets down into the just how you go about doing these little things. Because a few months ago, you asked us if we could get a list of the candidates for the Italian offices that were up for voting, and
it wasn't so easy.
How to do?
No, it was not easy at all. Actually, we didn't get it.
No,
no, that's right.
And these people are.
That is true. I mean, in some countries, it's easier to get hold of a list of candidates and their email addresses than it is in others. But I'm hoping that as we, I mean, there's 2 points. One is in the run-up to elections, I'm hoping that with more and more support and people who are more connected to the political world, that we will be able to get that information, because it must be out there. The other point is that SIMPOL doesn't only work at election times. People sign up at any time. Sure. And when they sign up, we will forward their sign-up information to their local politician and invite the politician to sign the pledge that they will implement SIMPOL alongside other governments. And in some cases, it just takes one person doing that for the member of parliament to sign up. And I think that's because although what I've talked about is quite a kind of coercive process of driving politicians to sign the pledge, many politicians, including some in safe seats, have signed up just simply because they can see the logic of SIMPOL and they just think it's a good idea. And in many ways, I think they feel liberated, because I think many politicians are actually aware of how the need to keep the nation competitive actually ties their hands and prevents them from really implementing or promoting even some real solutions to these big global problems that are really rising up around our ears. And so when they see a campaign like SIMPOL, which says we can do this in a way that doesn't harm any nation's competitiveness, they love it. So I'm not saying all of them, but there are a significant number who have just signed up because they think it's a good idea. It makes sense.
So that's interesting. Not everyone loves it. Who loves it? What politicians don't love it?
Well,
you are muted. Nick, you are muted. You are muted again. You need to unmute yourself. We don't hear you. You must unmute yourself. I muted you because there's too much noise from there. We don't hear him.
Well, I'm just answering your question, Mark.
Okay.
I mean, I don't specifically know. You know, politicians actually haven't really objected to SIMPOL as such. When they are not prepared to sign up, I just get their usual kind of standard stock response that they're working through the United Nations and they're doing, you know, what any political party would generally answer to any member of the public asking a question about global issues. So we haven't really had any reasoned objection to SIMPOL. We've just had brush-offs, really.
And I have a question for Nick. How would people take on the new responsibility they get and the new freedom?
Wait a minute. We're way from that.
Okay.
Look, the first thing to say about what the discussion is that it's not that politicians would not understand the beauty, the simplicity, the effectiveness of SIMPOL. It's that the party system doesn't like it because SIMPOL doesn't need a party system.
Yeah.
And it cuts across the party system. So politicians themselves would perfectly understand it. They just wouldn't want to implement it if they were not somewhere looking for a different solution to the 2-party or 3-party or 4-party or 5-party solution. The issue is more for the voters, you see, and the voters, when we think all the people that you and I know who really talk a lot about politics, and intelligently, and people in universities, they all tend to have quite a classically left-wing persuasion, and some of them have a quite advanced, what is now being called a meta-modern persuasion. The problem is, it's back to what John said earlier, it's because people don't realize that government is impotent. What am I supposed to do when you wave your fingers at me? I have no idea.
Because now we
didn't hear you. It was a lot of noise and we didn't hear you, but now you are back.
Why don't I switch the camera off?
Yeah, now it's good. Now you can continue the last sentence.
Where did you lose me?
Just the end.
The fact is that the voters are the ones who need to get this, and it only needs it needs enough, but it needs a small amount. So all the kind of people who you and I know who would think intelligently and with concern about politics and the planet could get this. But there is a psychological problem, and the psychological problem comes back to where we are because of the denial about destructive global competition. There's a denial that the authorities are impotent. Mm-hmm. And people don't like to see their authorities impotent, particularly anyone left of center, because you have grown up thinking that authorities are really bad and you need to be on top of them and tell them what they should be doing. And they don't realize, because of global competition, these people who are the authorities cannot actually do the kind of changes unless we tackle the sort of things which are making the politicians impotent by means of something. It could be simple, it could be something else, which actually allows them to make moves without first mover disadvantage. It's not that they are unwilling, they have their hands tied. And so we have to have a different relationship to our authorities. Now that, of course, you will know that it involves an awful lot of psychology. So now we're talking about everybody's like mother and father stuff, and everybody who's in Greenpeace and global justice and who's a bit of a rebel is really in their identity big time about being a rebel against the bad authorities. So they don't want to know this. So they are dissociating just the same as the classic modernist economics dissociates its externalities. and we still stay stuck. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's. I mean, when it comes to voters, I think that there are two aspects. One is what Nick is saying is that voters need to start to understand the vicious circle of destructive global competition and what it means. But I think the other thing is that many people just feel simply that anything they do won't make any difference. Yeah. And I think that is why I've spent the best part of the last 10 years focusing on the on national elections. Because, I mean, just for example, at the last UK election last year, the last UK general election, we succeeded in getting over 650 candidates from all the main parties to sign the SIMPOL pledge, the pledge to implement the simultaneous policy. And of those, 65 are now members of parliament. That's about 10% of the UK parliament. Now, the important thing is this: the number of active SIMPOL supporters that it took to achieve that result was a tiny handful. That's the leverage power that SIMPOL has. And so what we're trying to convey to citizens is that you are powerful with this highly leveraged voting system. Just when you thought your vote had become pretty meaningless, it is now transformed into potentially the most powerful tool for global justice. And so, on the one hand, we are not impotent. We are very powerful, but only if we make that psychological leap that Nick is talking about. And that involves, I think, summing it up, Nick, it involves releasing ourselves from being in this child position where we're the victims of our parents' decisions, to realizing through SIMPOL that actually, you know what? We are in the driving seat, and our politicians will have to just do what we require. But that's a huge shift, for people to make, and that, in a sense, is what we're up against. But once people make that shift, it becomes very, very simple.
And I agree, Nick, that going out of victimism and taking over responsibility is not the easiest way of living.
No.
It's much easier to blame somebody else. Your fault.
No, it's not. You're absolutely right. I mean, we know that if we take power as citizens, and as I call myself a psychohistorian, which, I think about people who died for the vote, all over the world. And I think about the struggle that women had for the vote, and the struggle that working men had for the vote. And I take the vote very, very seriously. And I think everybody can do. The thing we can't take so seriously is the quality of political parties we've got. So let's not throw the vote out with the bathwater. Let's use our vote for something which actually is going to work. And when I look at SIMPOL, I think it has an ability to work, and it just needs a critical mass really to start making movements, because there are certain things that we as citizens can't tolerate. And one is the climate going on. The other thing is the tax havens all over the world. And there are many, many things which affect each and every one of us. And we have to tackle this before we tackle the things which are most visible, such as inequalities. We have to tackle these things in order to solve inequalities. We can't go straight at inequalities in the old way, because it doesn't work in the same way. We have to go in at a new way, and we have to get some real structure, and we have to educate and train our politicians, because politicians are often very able people, but in terms of their kind of up-to-date thinking, they're usually a bit behind the curve. So citizens have to train them.
Yeah,
so
I think
can I come in? There is a comment from, but a question, Tom Habib. he says, John, is the simple process only in UK, or have you started offering the process in other countries?
Yes, we have. Where is Tom?
Tom, at the moment, he stayed with us for 3 or 4 days, and now he's in Rome, and tomorrow he goes to California.
Okay, but he's a citizen of
USA.
USA. We have supporters in the USA. We have a US website, which you can find on our global site, but we don't yet have anyone who's come forward to volunteer to really sort of help us drive the campaign forward. But if he wants to help out, he can send me an email, and I'll be delighted.
And some do that. And the idea, the USA is so two-party, you know, that seems to be so stuck.
That's the other thing I wanted to say, Heidi, is that you know, there's all this polarization at the moment, whether it's in Italy, in the US, across the Western world now, and it's resulted in Brexit and Trump, and now you see what's happening in Italy also with 5 Star and the League. But this, what we would try to explain to people in the book, that this is also a direct consequence of destructive global competition. Sure. Why? If you think about it, the need for every nation to stay competitive means that every government over the past, you know, ever since globalization started in the 1980s, has had to keep their national economy competitive. What does that mean? It means that they're all obliged, more or less, to implement neoliberal free market policies that favor corporations and the rich, that keep immigration coming in to keep labor costs low, to keep their industries competitive. And so it's not surprising that voters feel disempowered, because they think, well, whether I vote right or left, blue or green or yellow, it doesn't make any difference. And they're right. And that's because of destructive global competition. You see, this is how global forces that are running riot at the global level, the free movement of capital, is having a trickle-down effect on national politics. And so the result is now that people think, well, I'm fed up with the mainstream, right or left, whether it's the center right, center left, none of them can do it, so they go to the extremes. So they vote Brexit, or they vote Trump, or they vote for the anti-establishment parties. You see, but what they're all failing to realize is that the problem isn't national, it's global. You see, the problem is coming from the global level because of destructive global competition. And so what will happen, I think, is that you know, the problem cannot be solved at the national level. And what you will see is people moving more and more and more to the right, to the further right, and you're just going to see more polarization and more strife and violence eventually. But both right and left need to realize that the problem resides up at the global level, and that's where it's got to be dealt with. It can't be dealt with at the national level anymore.
Yeah, and they think often, I think the left, to accuse the of the world, but actually it helps, you know, that with an approach like you propose, you can do something instead of only saying, that's what it is, and they are the bad guys, and we have to fight them and dismiss them and blame them and whatever.
Yeah, Heidi, listen, identity issues go very deeply, and they're very unconscious. You know, there's a whole lot of surface identity things that we know about. But if you're being run around, for example, by what psychotherapists call the rebel subpersonality, you don't know it, but you have a pretty good identity going, and it'll last you the life as long as you got something to fight against. So, and if you're a good modernist corporate guy and you're busy dissociating all the effects, you're also quite happy because you're also dissociating. So you've got those kind of psychological problems going on. But the beauty of SIMPOL is it only needs, honestly, a very small critical mass, and not even critical mass, a very small amount of supporters who can be very active through the very simple online tools that are already there with minimum, I say minimum engagement. I haven't done it, but they can actually make a stink quite quickly. And when that starts to snowball, the politicians are going to say, we want to do this because it's in our best interests, because it's a vote bringer. Because the thing that is actually, you got to know, people should know, the absolute cutest thing about SIMPOL, because in the beginning, I was in big doubt about the haves and the have-nots. And then I realized that when, I'm a bit of a philosopher, then I saw that John was using competition as the basis of SIMPOL to get beyond a destructive competitive paradigm. Because actually, metaphysically, competition, that energy, that very kind of compelling energy, you should only need to use very rarely in your life. The rest of the time, you should be using cooperative energy. There's just only a few times you need to go, bang, let's do this like this now. And that's what needs to happen around the voting process, you see. And it doesn't, what we don't need is nations being competitive, afraid of resources in markets running out all the time, because that kind of competition means they keep their eye off the ball of the big picture and don't see we're going to hell in the handcart. So only a small number of people, through the very cleverly worked out things that John will tell you about, if they get on board with this, they can start the ball rolling.
This is fine, but basically you say that people don't vote for parties anymore, but for people who have signed up. So what do you say as a psychologist to people who for their lifelong time have been married with one party?
Oh,
no,
I say it's very, very tragic. You've got to go through a gate of tragedy before you know you need SIMPOL. You've got to realize, oh my God, I mean, a Labour Party, I mean, I love the Labour Party in some level. I was lucky enough to have 10 minutes chat with their leader at Euston Station. I think he's a fabulous man, but they just can't do it. And it can't be done like that. It's, we're in a new set of rules. And in this new set of rules, parties and nations aren't up to the game. It's not to say that nations can't still do things within nations. Of course they can. And of course national governments have got a use. But the whole thing, we've gone beyond internationality now. We need something which is going to operate almost supranational, where we can start to fix some. I mean, it's raining all the time. It's raining here again. We've got to be able to get onto some of this stuff. We've got to, do something about the Cayman Islands. We're not going to do that through nations.
I wouldn't say it's a tragedy, actually, Heidi.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what Nick means, but, if you are very wedded to your party, that's fine, but you can write to your party to say, I'd like you to sign up to SIMPOL. You don't. It's both and. But Nick is right in the sense that people do have to really go through the the death process, if you like, of actually letting go of the nation-centric, letting go of the idea that if I just vote in this party, all these problems will be solved. If I just vote in that party, America will be great again. Or if we just have Brexit, there'll be nirvana in the UK. I mean, this is just fantasy. And that's because, we no longer live in a nationally ordered world. We have a globalized world. And in effect, what we have is we have a global economy. That's global, but our governance is basically just national. So you've got a governance gap And anything that is global, like capital or multinational corporations or crime syndicates, anything that can move globally and transnationally has the advantage over anything that remains nationally rooted, like governments, like the environment, like the poor or the middle classes. And so, you know, the only way to resolve that is to bring governance up to the global level. And that's really what SIMPOL allows us to do in a very powerful way.
And here's the really simple thing, is that actually we don't need very much more in the way of institutions or even skills, because the level of cooperation that we already do on the planet is already phenomenal. You know, for example, air traffic control, you know, that cooperates perfectly well. There's no problem. It's a bloody miracle. And we already know how to do that, yeah? And we do that because we're looking through one lens, as it were, and we find out what's the technology we're going to apply to this lens for this kind of outcome. Human beings are good at this. We know how to do it, yeah? The problem is, let's go back to where we were, in terms of people have not yet been ready to give up, to admit, to come out of denial, to say, oh my God, we can't do it like this anymore. It's not working, which is why in the book, we take everybody, every reader, very slowly, very carefully through the 5 phases of grieving, which Kubler-Ross many years ago with great wisdom discovered and filled out. And we take everybody through that, and particularly through the bargaining stage. So John is very smart on the bargaining, but he can show you immediately how some kind of government, global, corporate action only is simply a kind of a bargaining plea. It's not, as we say in systems therapy, it's not a second order change, it's a first order change. Or in integral, people say it's more translation. It's translation, it's going along the flatland, it's not transforming, it's not going up to the next level of context where things are organized differently, where actually you see solutions differently already because you're looking from a different place.
Yes, so for example, you know, one example of bargaining would be, for example, I mean, in the book, we talk about these factory fires that have happened in Bangladesh in the clothing factories, which are so poorly, you know, have virtually no safety measures at all. And they have fire after fire. And I think a couple of years ago, no, it was longer. I think about 3 years ago, hundreds of people died in one of these factory fires. And so the NGOs, of course, get onto this and they start agitating for better conditions. And they got the multinational clothing and fashion companies to sign up to a protocol on safety for Bangladesh, which is great. But, you know, if you actually read the protocol, which I think many, you know, the companies also signed up to, you know, paragraph 25 down the bottom somewhere says, naturally, we remain free to purchase our clothing from, you know, wherever is adequately competitive. So the problem is that if Bangladesh becomes uncompetitive by having to raise its factory safety standards, the corporations will just go somewhere else. Now, I'm not saying that what NGOs are doing is a waste of time. Far from it. I'm saying they should do it. But it's what they're not doing. In other words, it's things like SIMPOL that they're not doing. That's the problem. They should do both. Not just, you know, they need to do the immediate thing, but they also need to do the strategic thing. And it's the absence of global strategic collective action. That's the gap that SIMPOL aims to plug.
Yeah, that makes really sense. We are about 10 minutes from the end. And so I would like you to talk a little bit about what everybody can do without being a politician like me. I don't really like do? What can a person in Bangladesh do? What can a person in USA do, and wherever?
Well, wherever you're in a democratic country, I would say please sign on to SIMPOL. It's completely free. And if possible, if you are, I'm a businessman. I don't have a political background. You don't have to be a great expert in anything at all. Join the campaign, get involved, and help out and talk to people about this.
What does help out mean? What does get involved mean?
Well, it can mean a variety of things. It can mean, firstly, just simply talking to your family about SIMPOL and asking them to look at the website, encouraging them to sign up. It could be maybe giving a little talk to your community if you have that opportunity, or to your school. The levels of engagement are anything that you feel comfortable with, all the way up to potentially joining them, starting and joining the management team of a national SIMPOL organization in your country.
Well, can I clarify a bit, John? Because I always think there's a bit of a danger that we give an impression that SIMPOL is like a big organization, and it's like joining another organization or another party. And although it has some organizational structure, SIMPOL is actually a process and a tool. It's more like an application. And actually, if you want to sign up and find out how that application can be used, the structures created in SIMPOL already have already done, most of the work for you, so you can use them. And the other thing, if you think you want to join the community of SIMPOL, people who are applying it and working it, it's not like signing up for a party. It's actually, it's something, of course, there's a community. And it's just getting interested in a way of applying pressure in your local political scene right now.
Yeah.
And that's,
I mean, if a citizen signing on to the campaign, which is free and just takes a couple of minutes, that's the most important thing you can do. And because we will then forward that information to your member of parliament, telling them that you want them to sign the SIMPOL pledge, and that you'll be giving voting preference at future elections to candidates that have signed the pledge. So that's the most important minimum engagement.
And basically it's saying, watch out, there's another person on your case. We hold you to account.
Yeah, so can I talk from the position of who doesn't know a whole lot? So I sign up for you, like I normally sign up for a newsletter, and now I wait that something is coming. Okay, so I'm sort of a consumer. Well, I have understood that with signing up, it's good, so you are part of, you get the information and so. But isn't it that you said that with being part of that and talking to my family, it's good, but shouldn't I talk with my candidates and push them a little bit and ask them, what did you do and what is your opinion and so on? Or is it all you doing it? You are muted, John. John, you're muted. Okay.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Well, SIMPOL is a little bit different, Heidi, because remember that this is not about national or local politics, it's about global politics. And so you are not, when you are asking your politician to sign up, and when you join the campaign and we tell them that you'll be giving voting preference to candidates, we are not expecting them to actually do anything other than sign the pledge. Why? Because SIMPOL only gets implemented only if and when all or sufficient nations sign up. The whole point of SIMPOL is that politicians can't do what is really necessary at the global level until all or sufficient nations are on board. So we don't expect them to do anything other than sign the pledge. But that doesn't mean, that's not an excuse for what they can do unilaterally. Maybe if they, if there's a campaign going for for Germany or Italy to reduce its emissions by 10 or 15% or whatever the NGOs are campaigning for, you carry on doing that as well. So it's not in any way undermining what is possible at the national level. It is opening up electorally what can only be done at the global level. So it's very easy for you, but I think what I would like for citizens to realize is that joining SIMPOL is also joining a community of people who are operating at a more world-centric level of consciousness, who can talk about politics in that more encompassing and I would say deeper way. And I think if you are somebody who is interested in politics, you will find people within SIMPOL that you feel at home with. You know, if you're fed up with listening to the polarization crap that we all have to listen to from right or left, and deeper down we know this is just, you know, this is just tit for tat rubbish. SIMPOL offers you a community of people that are thinking and talking in a more mature, more global, more authentic way when it comes to politics.
So another question, you said that it's in democratic countries, and that how many countries do you think you need that this can happen? And if you need non-democratic countries for having enough number, how would that go?
Good question. The way I envisage this, Heidi, is that the campaign will get going in the democratic countries first. And that, like I said, we have MPs signed up in the UK, also in Ireland, in Germany, and in one or two other countries. We have a few in the European Parliament as well. So I think what I envisage is that the momentum will build in democratic countries first. Then I think we're going to see the United Nations negotiations. I mean, I hope that this is wrong, but the way things are going, the negotiations on global issues through the standard institutions are failing. And if they continue to fail, I think SIMPOL will gradually become, it will go up and up, will become more prominent, and will become accepted eventually as the way to do this. And then I think we could see some non-democratic countries just voluntarily joining the process, simply because it will have by then become the only game in town. Now, if the UN radically somehow solves the problem of the Security Council veto, starts negotiating multiple global issues at the same time, and radically changes its approach, then it might succeed. But at the moment, it doesn't look like it. So what I'm saying to people is, don't stop supporting the UN or supporting your government that supports the UN, but support SIMPOL too, because we need a last resort citizens global movement to solve this problem should the standard approaches fail.
Okay, and so what I have understood is that you need people in still a lot of countries who will take it in the hand and promote the whole thing and do a sort of an organization around it. So you need volunteers who have a little bit of time and who really understand what you're up to and inspire other people to do it. Exactly.
That's exactly right, Heidi. And, I know it's a big ask, but, we need, we need people to feel this, I think, in the depths of their souls. And if they do, they will, I think they'll be happy to get engaged and get involved. We know it's a slow process. Everybody who's a volunteer is volunteering part-time. They all have jobs, their regular day jobs. So, this is something that needs to be worked at little by little to try to change consciousness, to try to get more politicians signed up, try to get NGOs aware of SIMPOL, and then hopefully supporting it as well.
Yeah, wonderful.
I just want to thank everybody for letting my ears work rather than my mouth.
I think maybe I'll have to thank someone for shutting me up, probably.
Yeah, I thank you both, because it was illuminating again, and I especially like the psychological approach, and I certainly will buy the book, because I'm so much interested in psychology and the marriage of politics and psychology. That's great. Wow. Yeah. Thank you very much. And before we close, I will give you both, and also to you, what was the insight? What was the main, impact on you today?
I'm going to pass on that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's getting his breath problems.
Yes, I am.
Okay. But I'm glad that you made it the whole hour.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Can you still hear me and see me? Am I still in the picture?
Yes, you are.
I just said, anybody wants
some closing words from Nick.
If anybody wants to know what psychohistory is, you can go to www.woundedleaders.co.uk/psychohistory, and you'll have some interesting explanations there. It's very interesting to think that way about the kind of problems in the States they're having with the children in the schools and guns and all that. So have a look at that if you want. But more importantly, come and join us at SIMPOL, simple.org. Very simple.
Yeah, and thank you both, and especially you, Mark. I know you're not feeling too well at the moment, and I really appreciate you being willing to be there. I'm sure you'd rather be lying down or
yes.
taking it easy. So I hope you'll be feeling better soon.
Thank you very much for hosting us.
Everybody was Maybe
Thank you, guys.
We find another appointment if you have something special to bring out again. So some progress to announce. And people, read the book. We will do that too, I'm quite sure. And thank you for watching now and in replay. And please feel free to write comments and ask questions. We will monitor them and send them, and they will answer to that. Okay?
Thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.